Hi, this is Graham Brown, Lazy Money Machine with Eric Ten Hover. We are going to talk about pensions. If you're an American, this will be 401ks. Problem is, all around the world, we are seeing a squeeze in pensions. And we want to talk a little bit about it because people don't really talk about this stuff, right? Just before we dive into this article in the BBC, let's talk about pensions and what people say about pensions. I mean, Eric, you're from the Netherlands. You live in Indonesia. I'm from the UK. I live in Japan. We travel around a lot. Whenever you come across this subject of pensions, do people's eyes glaze over? Do they talk enthusiastically about it, or they just kind of assume that will all work out? What kind of conversations do you have about pensions?
Yeah, this is interesting. I come from a country, the Netherlands, whereby that system is pretty well organized. And if people stop working, their contributions over their working life will be sufficient for them to get a certain percentage of their last earned salary or their average salary nowadays. So people, this caretaking part has been taken over by the government and by the employers. So nobody's actually ever really worried about their pension. You know, the people that I speak to in Indonesia, in the Netherlands, but here in Indonesia is a different story. Here, if people retire and they get their pension, I think they get somewhere between 20, 30, 40 times salary paid at once when they retire. Yeah. And then nothing afterwards. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they're thinking, oh, now I need to go and find a way to make something with this money, and then they have to start thinking about, okay, so how am I going to invest this? How am I going to grow this? Me personally, my situation was that at the time that I decided to leave my Dutch employer, which was after I came to Indonesia, I was still working for a Dutch firm. After I left that and became like an expat working on contract basis, I had no pension anymore. So this topic became something that I had to think about myself. And instead of finding a pension plan and contributing to it, I think I took the decision, okay, let me just find a way to do something with my money to make money for the future. Mm.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Is that most people assume that somebody's going to look after them. And that's kind of how it's been, isn't it, for our parents' generations and the parents' parents. However, we're the first generation really having to work it out ourselves. Because what's going to happen is we're going to get to this pension age, and most people are going to find out, actually, it didn't work out. And there's a number of reasons for this, right? Let's look at this. So people understand. I think people need to know what's going on. And that's kind of what we want to do in the Lazy Money Machine and the Lazy Money Tribe, right? Is share that information so people get educated. Let's look at what's going on with pension schemes, right? On the one hand, you have these changing population demographics, right? If you can imagine a pyramid, these were called population pyramids for a reason, because they were shaped where there were more young people at the bottom and a few young old people at the top, right? It's a pyramid. Mm-hmm. But look at the Netherlands or the UK or the US. They aren't pyramids anymore. They're kind of like diamond shapes, right? And they're moving almost into reverse pyramids in many countries, like in Japan.
Right.
So the problem with that is now you have fewer people paying in and more people taking out healthcare, insurance, all that kind of stuff. It costs money to look after old people, right? And they don't put money into the system. So that's going to be a problem with pensions. That's a major fundamental change which we have to be aware of, right? And there's this article in the BBC that says 3 million savers in final salary pension schemes. And these are schemes which would have been what our parents had. You said average salary, right? Which is maybe what they have in the Netherlands, right? Where you know when you retire you're going to get X thousand a year for the rest of your life, right? Mm-hmm. But they say 3 million people have a 50% chance of not receiving it, or not receiving what they expected, right? And
they're not aware of it, right?
Yeah, because I wonder. I mean, there was a big case in the UK, the BHS, which is a big retail chain that employed hundreds of thousands of people. The pension scheme collapsed. And this is just one of many things going on at the moment. These pension schemes are collapsing because of that demographic imbalance, right? Mm-hmm. People think that they're paying into their pot, right, and they're going to get that money out. That's not how it works. You're paying, if you're working now, you're paying into the people retiring now, right? I don't know, what it's like in the Netherlands, but in the UK, there's been big high-profile cases collapses. I mean, have we got there yet? I mean, maybe you're just better at organizing your money over there, right?
Well, the main fundamental is that most of these pension funds invest in the same assets, right? So if one is suffering, all are suffering because basically their investment strategy is more or less the same, no matter which country they come from.
Yeah.
I think it's a big concern, and I think it would be good for anyone, even though you're on some sort of a pension contribution plan from your employer, to think about this and to think, okay, what if, let's assume, this fairy tale is not going to end well. And let's assume that I'm not going to get what I think I'm going to get from the pension plan. Then what? Do I have an alternative? Do I have something else that I can fall back on? And I think I don't have a pension plan. I've never done any pension contribution. So I will need to think about how I'm going to survive after I stop working. But this is the interesting thing. I never stop working because I don't work anymore. I don't have a job anymore. So my whole life now is built around creating income streams that run without me.
Right.
And whether that's while I'm alive or whether that's when I'm old and crippled, it doesn't really matter because the things that I'm putting in place will hopefully run for the long term.
So property is your pension scheme, in effect, right?
That's right. And my kids. I mean, that's a bit of a fun joke, but I mean, that's what people here in Indonesia and in Asia do, right? They have lots of kids because the kids will take care of them.
Right, and that's what we talked about.
Assuming they make money
in the previous episode, right? I mean, if you die, the pension scheme stops paying out, right? If you have like a pension scheme, right? But if you die, I mean, you will die, right? We all will die, right? The property.
Hopefully, I don't think I want to live forever.
Well, let's see. But assuming, like everybody else, you will pass away at some point, that property will continue paying an income for your family, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And we did speak about that. I mean, and that's the issue with pension. You're only saving it for yourself. If you pass away, the pension provider, is happy because basically they stop paying you, and they won't pay your children, they won't pay your wife, unless you have additional insurances for that, right? If you have life insurance or other things, but that's things you have to organize yourself.
Yeah, and it's going to happen, isn't it? You said assume that it's going to turn out for the worst, and here's the data. This is just the UK alone, and this is happening everywhere in the world, so it's not a UK thing. The shortfall, so the deficit in pension schemes in the UK 6,000 schemes, right, is £400 billion. So let's say $600 billion. So it basically means that those schemes that all people are now paying into that are going to retire with soon at some point are short of $600 billion to pay back those people who've paid in, right? And that's only going to get worse.
They're pushing the problem forward all the time, right?
It's only going to get worse, and they're pushing it forward by making people work longer and all these kind of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not good, and it's getting worse because there's fewer people paying in and more taking out. Yeah, I think it's just we got to know. I mean, it's not the sexiest of subjects, but maybe that's why it gets kicked down the road.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to be aware of it, and the earlier you take responsibility for your own income later in life, or even now in life, I think the better. Working for someone can be part of it, but then think about how, besides that, I think you can work on something that outlives your active income from your job. I think that would be really, good for you.
Yeah. So that's pensions. Take control. Don't rely on anybody else because they don't have your interests in mind, right? That's how it all works out. So get educated. Build some passive income. This is Lazy Money Machine, Graham Brown and Eric 10 Ava.